While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entereth in where the damsel was lying. Going towards the end of Mark chapter 5, and Jesus Christ and a few of his followers, selected followers, were going to visit the very ill daughter of a very prominent or wealthy person in the area. And I'm concentrating there on verse 40, where the ruler of the synagogue, this important man, he had some of his workers, employees, or relatives even. They met Jesus and this ruler and Peter, John, and James at the door, basically, of the house and said, It's too late. The little girl is dead. Your daughter's dead. Don't bother Jesus Christ right now. The point we're focusing on here is the fact that he put them out. He put the people who are laughing at the idea that Jesus Christ could heal this little girl. They thought it was outrageous. They thought it was preposterous. They didn't believe. They did not have faith. So Jesus put them out. And notice in the first place, he only brought a few of his followers with him. And you're going to notice throughout the New Testament, as these men are following Jesus, he's usually going to take the same handful of men, disciples, along with him at very key times in his life. What made me think about this verse, or struck me about it, was I started remembering, this is going back more than 10 years. It's a church anniversary, and I happened to be there. And there was a man in that church who was in one of those rolling chairs, basically. Something was wrong with his legs. He could move around, but he almost always used this electric chair. Long story short, one of the visiting pastors wanted to lay hands on this man in prayer after he was done preaching. I remember there were some visiting men from another church, or they had been there for the preaching, but they were now going to go their own way. And they weren't really about the healing part of this service. And I happen to know these men. I knew a lot of people in the area. I knew some people at that church, and I knew these men from the other church. And they called me back to the back door as they were leaving and were chatting with me. And it wasn't a very big church now. So somebody standing at the door and talking above a whisper, you can hear them in the whole church. So they're up there praying in the front, near the pulpit, gathered around this man in his rolling chair. And these two men that were visiting, we were in the back, chatting about this and that. Nothing really important, nothing that needed to be talked about right then. I didn't really pay attention to this. I wasn't sensitive to that until later when I thought back. Like, man, we were kind of loud back there while they're up there praying for this man to get healed. We should have been put out. We should have put ourselves out, because right then we may have or could have hindered the Holy Spirit moving for that man in the chair. And who knows what the results of that would have been if everybody in that building, including me and those two visiting men, had been all in like the people up at the front had been. There's a lot of examples in the Bible about getting put out, basically. You're not part of the circle. You're not helping. In fact, you're hurting. At best, you're neutral, but sometimes being neutral is a hurt. You know, some of the things I'm thinking about from the Bible are, they kind of have this principle to it, where it's about what kind of spirit are you approaching the Lord with. He's going to respond to that. I'm thinking about what they call the prodigal son. Now, you're going to remember when the prodigal son comes back, I guess it's the younger brother who was out and about and realized that it was better at home with the father. So he goes back, the father receives him, they have a large feast, and they're celebrating. Look there in Luke chapter 15, and it's verse 25. Now his elder son, this is the father, his elder son was in the field. And this is the elder son now, I'll stop right there, where he had never left the property, or he had never left the family, the household. He is always helping the father. He's always trying to do what pleases his dad. And so he's a bit upset that this younger son who'd run off, blown all of his inheritance, and now he's back and they're celebrating him. They're singing and dancing and eating everything. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And that's when he found out, this older brother, the brothers come back, the father's killed the fatted calf. And it says there in verse 28, this other son, the faithful son, he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and he treated him. And he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgress I at any time thy commandments. You never gave me a kid. I mean, you never gave me a feast like this, and that I might make merry with my friends. But my brother, he just ran off, and you're just celebrating him like he's the greatest thing in the world. And the father assures him, hey, everything I have is yours, son, so you shouldn't be upset. It's always been yours because you've been here. I'm just glad that your brother, my son, my other son, he's back safe and sound. That's why we're celebrating. But I'm looking at that because it says the other brother, the older brother, I think, the faithful brother, he put himself out. Now, was the Holy Spirit out there with this angry brother, or was he inside with the father and the son and everybody that's celebrating that this lost person has been found? And it's something to be glorious about. The Holy Spirit was definitely in the house, rejoicing that one sheep had been found in principle. Jesus is telling this story as an illustration there in Matthew 22. And he's talking about a king who had a banquet. He wanted to have a celebration himself. He invited many people. Few people wanted to come. This is a picture of salvation for sure. He's inviting everybody. But most people don't want to be with the Lord. But there were a few that came. Not the original ones that the king got invited, but there were some people who did show up. And then in verse 11 of Matthew 22, when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. There's a lot in that, but we might be able to circle back around to that. And the king saith unto him, Friend, how camest thou in hither, not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless, this man. Then said the king to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There should be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. But that last part is a very famous phrase that people within and without a Christian faith use all the time. Many are called, but few are chosen. But the point I'm making here is this guy got put out because he didn't belong there. He didn't have the right garments or right clothing. And again, that's a lot of levels to what Jesus is saying here about this banquet that the king was throwing, about garments and belonging somewhere, trying to get in somewhere where, hey, you can't come in here because you haven't been with us. And now you're trying to come in here, basically. This guy got put out because he was not really a part. He was not a partaker of what was going on. I mean, there's a lot of this kind of principle in the Bible. You can go back to the Old Testament, Numbers 16. A lot of people are murmuring against Moses' leadership. They want the milk and honey that was promised. They think Egypt, where they just came from, is better than where they are now, currently. The Lord opened the earth and swallowed these murmurers, these complainers, just for complaining. Did they get put out? Yes, they did. You can go right after Mark chapter 5 to Mark chapter 6. It says that Jesus was basically in his hometown. You see there in verse 1, he came into his own country and his disciples follow him. He's teaching in the synagogue. Many hearing him were astonished because they saw him grow up as a boy, but they think it's just a boy and a young man. And so when he comes back into town, basically saying, hey, I'm the Son of God. I've got all this power, all this knowledge. I'm from the Father. I'm always doing his will. I'm always doing what pleases him. That's going to bother some of these people who maybe from afar, they saw him learning his trade with his, what I would call his stepdad, Joseph. Learning to work with his hands, learning just how to grow up, maybe playing as a little boy or something. See, this guy says he's the Son of God. From whence hath this man these things? And which wisdom is this which is given unto him? That even such mighty works are wrought by his hands. Is not just the carpenters, and they were offended at him. A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. And he could there do no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them. And this is what I'm looking at, Mark 6, verse 6. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went round about the villages teaching. That's important right there, because it says he could there do no mighty work there in verse 5. Of course, with Jesus, he could do whatever he wants. He could override people's lack of faith, which he pretty much is going to do at the end of this anyway. Doesn't matter if you believe Jesus is the Son of God, that he's the only way, the truth, and the life, and the only way to the Father in heaven. Doesn't matter if you believe that. He's going to override your unbelief and your lack of faith there and complete what he came to do, what he's here to do. But it seems there are some times that he's got to give us an example. This is for our learning. This is for our admonition. Yeah, it says he could dare do no mighty work, but that was just for us. He marveled because of their unbelief. Go to Matthew chapter 25. I think there's a lot of these. This is a few more that I'm looking at right here. We can just talk a long time about this. Matthew 25 verse 33. He shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Well, you know about that. This is the separation of saved people from lost people. There's going to be some other separations, but that's the only one that really matters. Are you going to glory, or are you going to eternal separation? He's putting somebody out. He's putting the goats out. Back there, what I just talked about in Matthew chapter 6, he goes to his own stomping grounds, old stomping grounds, Jesus does. And the people that don't believe in him. They don't believe on him. So he ends up leaving, and he's surprised because they really have a strong unbelief. They pretty much put him out. They put the Holy Spirit out in that case. Well, we'll just stop there for now. But that's enough examples that you can see how your thinking, your attitude, your belief, your faith, it does matter. Now, I've had people say to me before, I witnessed to them, or maybe somebody that I grew up with sometimes. Somebody I grew up with once, I was talking about, how things have changed for me as I'm walking with the Lord. And he interrupted me and he said, I don't have the faith like you do. And I said, that's because you don't want it. It's right there before you. You just don't want to pick it up. You got to keep focused on the Lord's righteousness. That will increase your faith. If you're pursuing his righteousness, as it tells us in Matthew, all the other things are going to be added to you.